The Council for Islamic Banks and Financial Institutions has been focusing on professional development and exploring fintech integration for the past month. But how has the Islamic banking and finance space fared overall since the beginning of the pandemic? I spoke to the Secretary General of CBAFI, Abdelila Bilatik, for more.
The business model of the Islamic banks is slightly different. It provides, of course, financial intermediation, but through different assets and other contracts. So there is always a need to have tangible projects, and money cannot be lent just for money, and have to be on specific projects. And these projects have to have certain features, for instance, on the ethical requirements.
Right. Well, in that case, if it is based on tangible projects, I'm sure that it's been impacted quite a bit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us just a bit about how it's impacted the Islamic banking and finance space in general?
Well, in general, if I can say, I mean, for now, these are really exceptional circumstances, and the whole world, the whole economy is impacted. So Islamic finance, like conventional finance, is in ways impacted. But if we can say, until beginning of this year, the situation was very good. So Islamic banks in general, globally, they are well capitalized. Their capital adequacy ratios and so on, and liquidity ratios were good. So we were actually in a good trajectory. But when this came, so it stopped quite the growth trajectory, if we can say. If on the other hand, I mean, as the whole economy is impacted with this situation, we can say that so far, really the impact on Islamic banks is really on loss of revenues, if we can say. But we did not see really significant defaults of financing and so on. There are certain sectors, of course, of the economy that have problems, but the fact that governments in many of the countries have had some interventions and encouraged or asked banks to postpone the installment payments in case of financing to for 3 or 6 months, depending on the countries. So this gave perhaps some room or some ease of working for the customers of the Islamic banks, which is quite positive. Now, the situation, of course, is very exceptional and needs to be monitored carefully. The next 3 months and beyond perhaps will be some of the most period to watch for this year.
Right. What efforts have you seen on behalf of some of the institutions that you work with in order to mitigate some of these revenue losses or accommodate some of the clients' issues that they're having during this time? Have there been any incentives in that regard?
Yes, sure. Actually, immediately after the situation broke out in mid of March, we had an executive committee meeting at CBAFI, and we have members in over 35 countries. Remember, Islamic Bank Committee we had a meeting, a special meeting to discuss the impact of the pandemic on the economy, on the Islamic banks, on health, and so on. And we had a number of recommendations that were implemented. Among them was really to work hand in hand with the regulators, central banks in the different countries to support the economy, and not to have like a too much protective attitude, because exceptional situation and communities are in difficulty. So really the bad thing is to have this protective action. So there was more. There was a recommendation to, for example, to postpone payments to at least 3 or 6 months, and there was kind of really consensus among all the members to say, for these few months coming, if there is loss of revenue, it's not a big problem. like revenue less, but it's not a big problem because this will support the economy. And then for the medium to long term, it will have more positive impact. So there was also like we encourage discussion, direct discussion between the banks and some of the most impacted sectors. For instance, you know, the hospitality sector. There is also like all the airlines sectors, and most importantly, the SMEs. SMEs is one of the perhaps the biggest sectors that the Islamic banks are interested in, and therefore, in many of these countries, and I think I can say in African countries, this is unstructured sectors, like informal sector, but they have a very big impact on its lives. So we encourage the banks to be in these situations and to understand better how they are impacted and how the Islamic banks providing facilities and providing opportunities for later payments until the situation stabilizes.
Right. You know, before we wrap up, I did want to ask you about some of the online features that some of the members you've been working with are adapting. Many banks and financial institutions have had to focus their energy on updating their digital solutions and moving a lot of business online because of lockdowns. How have the institutions that you worked with managed to keep up with that demand?
I think this was very interesting. In general, all these financial technologies, and I think there are lessons also to learn from Africa in this regard. For the financial technologies, we started a few years ago, 3, 4 years, discussions with members on the need, really the urgent needs to move ahead and to provide more solutions and so on. So for the last 2, 3 years, we see like maybe started a bit doing some changes and providing some more like online or services or mobile payments and so on. But since this happened, we saw really a real acceleration of this process. And luckily, many of the members or the Islamic banks in general, they were starting already doing, I mean, in doing these projects. I think, and the good thing, and which I think Africa can give very good lessons to this, is that Africa in financial technologies has a great potential and can give examples to Islamic finance and to the conventional finance, especially in mobile payments and transactions, which is very, very advanced compared to many advanced countries like in the region here in the GCC or in other places. So I think through perhaps this collaboration, and the pandemic showed us the urgent need of this. So luckily, this was something that started from before, and we actually just completed a survey which we are releasing within 1, 2 days. I mean, actually today will be released. And we talk about financial technologies, mobile payments, and so on. And we clearly see that African region or sub-Saharan African region has a competitive advantage related to this. And the sentiment related to the growth of the Islamic finance in general in that region is probably the highest among the members that we have globally.